On the 27th of June 1976, an Air France A300 Airbus bound for Paris from Tel Aviv was hijacked by Palestinian and German terrorists after a brief stop in Athens. With 254 passengers on board, including many Israeli citizens, the plane was diverted to Africa. It eventually ended up in Uganda, then run by the ruthless dictator Idi Amin, who was in league with the Palestinians. Amin placed armed guards on the plane while the hostages were herded into a disused airport terminal building. Negotiations to secure their release began, with the Palestinians demanding the release of 53 Arab and German prisoners. Over the next few days, all the hostages, except the French aircrew and 95 Jewish passengers, were released. Anxious relatives invaded the residence of the Israeli Prime Minister to urge him to negotiate. But the Israeli government had no intention of doing so. And on the evening of the 3rd of July, Operation Thunderbolt was launched. 4 Israeli Lockheed C-130 Hercules transports, packed with 35 commandos, 52 paratroopers, and a variety of vehicles, headed south towards Entabe. The lead aircraft dipped low over Lake Victoria and lined up for Entabe Airport. It came in as if it were an ordinary commercial landing. The runway lights blazed and no one queried its approach. The Hercules stopped briefly as troops leapt out to set up landing beacons for the following aircraft. They then fanned out to seize the new terminal building, control tower and fuel point. Meanwhile, the Hercules set off down the old runway. It then halted and turned round. The rear ramp was lowered. 2 Land Rovers and a black Mercedes-Benz limousine packed with commandos drove out. With their lights blazing, the 3 vehicles drove at a steady 40 miles per hour towards the old terminal, as if they were President Amin's official motorcade. Close to the old terminal, 2 Ugandan guards challenged the leading vehicle. They were quickly shot dead with silenced pistols. Although it had lost the element of surprise, the assault team leapt out and raced towards the old terminal building. Bursting into the building, the commandos opened fire on a Palestinian terrorist who fell dead. Meanwhile, about 7 minutes after the first Hercules had landed, the next 2 arrived. The runway lights had now been switched off, but the beacons guided them in. These aircraft were carrying 4 Soviet-style armoured personnel carriers. Their task was to secure the main runway and fight off any Ugandan army counterattacks. All 3 aircraft now took up positions at the end of the runway, with their engines running so that they could depart at a moment's notice. At the old terminal, the assault continued. 4 terrorists were guarding the hostages in the main concourse area, and 3 were resting in the adjacent VIP lounge. All were eliminated in minutes. Unfortunately, 3 of the hostages were killed in the crossfire between the terrorists and the commandos. A number of Ugandan army soldiers were also killed during the brief firefight before the building was secured. During the assault, the commandos used loudhailers, shouting to the hostages, "Keep down," in Hebrew and English. Outside the terminal, the only commando killed during the raid, the assault forces commander, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Netanyahu, was hit by a bullet from the control tower. The Ugandan troops who fired it were swiftly wiped out by heavy return fire. Two of the armoured personnel carriers then raced past to deal with the MiG fighters of the Ugandan Air Force, which were based on the other side of the airport, while a screening force covered the approaches. The Ugandan Air Force was quickly dealt with, thus removing any possible threat to the Hercules when they departed. It was now time to go. The 4th Hercules had landed and now taxied up to the old terminal. The hostages were rushed out to it, and the plane turned back towards the main runway. As it did so, the Mercedes and the Land Rovers took the remaining commandos back to the waiting aircraft. With their mission accomplished, they drove back on board and away. The Hercules carrying the surviving hostages arrived in Tel Aviv soon after midday on the 4th of July. They were greeted rapturously by family and friends, and spontaneous celebrations broke out all over Israel as the news of the rescue spread.